Good morning, everyone. Great to see so many people on the call. I'm Johnny. I'm an Environmental Health Officer at Cornwall Council. Lots of experience of inspecting and supporting food businesses. So what I've done today, obviously, what we want is for all businesses in Cornwall to be really successful and get that 5 rating. Using sort of knowledge of where businesses typically fall short, I've put together a few slides just giving you some pointers to hopefully make sure that you avoid some of those pitfalls and achieve that rating of 5. I'm just going to start off for those people that might be looking to start a business. Just a quick reminder about registration. All food businesses must register with ourselves 28 days before they start trading. Once you are registered and you're in the inspection programme, businesses do also then need to let us know if anything changes, i.e. the scope, scale of what they're doing increases. So just a reminder there. I thought I'd also just mention about inspection frequency. So businesses are, as you might expect, inspected at a frequency proportionate to the risk. Okay, so the higher risk activities you're doing, or the least well you're managing it, the more frequent inspection you'll receive, and that can be anything from up to sort of every 6 months to every 2 years. And when we're looking at risk, it's a balance between the inherent risk of what you're doing, so how risky your activities are, sort of balance with how well you're doing it, managing food safety and complying with the law. So that makes sure we're in businesses at an appropriate frequency. The purpose of inspection really is 2 things. We can't deny that one of it is sort of about enforcement and making sure that businesses comply with the law and produce safe food. But the second bit of an inspection, it is an opportunity for businesses, food business operators, food handlers to actually ask us questions as well. So it really is a 2-way thing. It's for us to ask questions and learn things, but it's also an opportunity for the food businesses to ask questions and sort of, really use that experience of the officer to answer any questions that they've got and to hopefully strengthen things within the business. So we calculate the food hygiene rating score, what we'll refer to as the FHRS, using some quite stringent guidance. So we don't sort of just pluck a score out of thin air based on how much we like the business or how good the coffee's been. There's some really robust guidance, which means we apply the scheme fairly and consistently across Cornwall. We'll all agree that a level playing field and consistency and fairness is really important. So we look at 3 areas really when coming up with the score. Confidence in management, which is basically your food safety systems, your staff training, your track record, your food handling and hygiene practices, and also compliance with structural equipment requirements. So the first criteria is confidence in management. So what does that mean? You've probably all heard of the term food safety management systems, which sounds very scary, but basically what businesses must have is a system where they identify the relevant food safety hazards in their business and identify what controls they need to put in place to keep people safe. This usually involves a system of checks to make sure that you are actually effectively managing risks, and there is a requirement for a certain level of documentation. Now, most businesses on the call will probably be operating Safer Food, Better Business, which was a product that the Food Standards Agency came up with to make it easier for businesses to comply. So if you are fully implementing Safer Food, Better Business, you will be complying with the law. So, like I said, what I've done, using my sort of knowledge and understanding of where businesses fall short sometimes, I've come up with some guides for compliance. So hopefully if you do all of these things, you'll be on the right track. So the first thing to do is just be aware that there are various different versions of Safer Food, Better Business, so that it's really important that you're making sure that you're using the right pack, because that will be the pack that's most suitable for your business, and it will mean that you've covered all the typical operations. The most common one is catering, but there's also one aimed at retail, and there are also ones for childminders, care homes, and there's also various sort of cuisine specific ones, so for sort of Indian, Chinese kind of food as well. Now these packs are fairly generic, so if you do anything out of the ordinary or high risk, for example vac packing or sous vide, you may need to just add to the pack to make sure that certain business specific risks are covered, and that's something we can help with if you need it. So the one thing that often lets businesses down is the pack's not fully complete. So do on a regular basis review your pack and make sure that all sections are completed and up to date with current business practices. Now, if you've written down and told us and established what you're going to be doing to keep food safe, it's really important, of course, that you train your food handlers in these practices. Okay, so make sure that once you've recorded all your practices and procedures that you're going to be following, definitely make sure that you thoroughly trained your staff in the practices. And at the back of that pack, the diary section, you'll find some training records. Now, if you complete your training records, that will demonstrate to the food safety officer that you have trained your staff thoroughly. So see Safer Food, Better Business as a really useful training tool as well, but do make sure you complete those training records. And on a regular basis, it's really important that you check that your staff are doing what you say you're doing. So if you've written something in Safer Food, Better Business, you really need to make sure you're implementing that, because if you say you're going to do something and you don't, obviously that could affect your food hygiene score. It's really important that those opening and closing checks at the back of the pack are firstly being carried out in practice, but secondly that they're being recorded. Okay. And that's really good. That shows compliance with the law, and it also will protect you in the event of a food safety problem or a complaint. And there's a full weekly review in the diary section, which tends to get overlooked, but that's really important because that shows that you're looking at the business, you're responding to issues, reoccurring problems, maybe customer complaints, and putting things in place to stop it happening again. Now, although Safer Food, Better Business doesn't, excuse me, doesn't actually require you to record fridge temperatures and cooked food temperatures, by adding those into your diary section, that shows that you're operating in advance of what the law requires and actually operating to good practice. And again, it's good practice measures that help you get that higher rating. So once you've sort of established what could go wrong in your business and what you need to do to put it right, like I said previously, training is really important. And I just wanted to be clear here what the law requires. So if you read that top paragraph, food business operators must ensure that food handlers are supervised and instructed and or trained. Okay, so there's a few different things there you can do to make sure you're complying with the law. You can supervise and instruct staff, and some staff you might decide actually need formal training as well. During the inspection, officers are going to be asking you and your staff questions to make sure that they've got an appropriate level of understanding based on their roles and responsibilities. So training really is key. People have got to know what they're doing, and that's not going to come as any surprise. So please make sure you train your staff in the safe food handling practices in Safer Food, Better Business. Safer Food, Better Business is a really good training tool, so make full use of it, and don't forget those training records. You should also consider whether actually any formal food hygiene training is required based on what you're doing. And there's level 2 out there for food handlers and level 3 for managers and supervisors. So just make sure that everybody that's involved in handling food at your business has had the appropriate training. And it's always really important that, you know, before you let any new staff loose in the kitchen, that they have had some induction training covering the basics, and perhaps that they're buddied up with a more experienced member of staff to ensure that they know what they're doing. There's an interesting point there just on, you know, there's lots of online training available and also face-to-face. Now, although face-to-face training is more expensive, we can't deny that. We generally find that food handlers that go on face-to-face sort of classroom-based training get a lot more from it, and that really reflects in their level of knowledge and understanding. So where possible, do consider opting for face-to-face training, and I'll talk you through some of the training that we offer towards the end of the presentation. And it's really important that there are a system of checks in place. Food business operators, managers, supervisors really need to be checking, observing their staff, make sure they're doing what they should be doing, and actually dealing with any issues that they observe. For example, not washing hands at the appropriate time. Those conversations are awkward, I get that, but it's really important that they take place. And let's not forget that training and learning is ongoing. I think we all agree that every day is a school day. And unfortunately, also in confidence in management, we do have to take into consideration track record. Okay, so if businesses do start falling behind and are getting a lower and lower rate in each inspection, it kind of becomes a vicious circle. And I think we'd all agree that reputations are hard to build, but easy to lose. And we have just flashed some recent articles from Cornwall Live up there, which you'll all see. It's really important that this doesn't happen to your business. Nobody wants that, and that's why we're here to provide support to our business in Cornwall to keep them on the straight and narrow. So the next kind of criteria after confidence in management is hygiene practices. Now, this is basically food handling practices and procedures from the moment food is ordered and delivered to the business to the point that we serve it to our customers. And I just thought I'd run through some of those areas now. Again, based on some problems we've seen, I've sort of given you some guides to compliance. So of course, purchase and supply, we should only be using reputable suppliers, and you might decide to only buy food from businesses that have got a good food hygiene rating. That would obviously be really sensible. There's a section to record your supplies in Safer Food Better Business, so please make sure that's completed. One other thing we do see is that sometimes food is delivered outside of business hours, and we arrive to do an inspection, you've got food sort of defrosting in the car park or being pecked at by birds, etc. So do make sure that food is delivered during opening hours, or perhaps that the supplier has some as a key or some way of getting in. And you should be completing just some sensible basic checks on any food delivered into the premises, making sure that it's the right product. That's particularly important when we think about allergens. If a supplier has sent a substitution, the allergens could be different, and therefore we could be giving incorrect allergen information to the customer when requested. It's obviously important to make sure that the food is under temperature control. It's cold, it's still frozen. We want to make sure that packaging's intact and the food is in date. And it's really important there to make sure that we understand how long that product has got. We're often finding food past its use by date in businesses, which has only just been delivered. And that's a particular problem sort of at the end of a busy season when your suppliers are sort of trying to get rid of surplus amounts of food. Storage. This includes sort of storage in the fridges, the freezers and dry store. Of course, the thing that really matters is storage in the fridge. And there's three main things to think about here: temperature, prevention of contamination, and in particular cross-contamination, and stock rotation. So if we take each of those in turn, so fridges, the law says, doesn't it, that food in the fridge must be stored at or below 8 degrees, and that's to keep it safe. However, best practice, we do recommend 2 to 5 degrees because this gives a bit of a safety net. We should be checking fridge temperatures at least twice a day, and we always recommend that one of those checks is the very start of the day. So if anything's gone wrong overnight, you're in a position to be able to take action before serving food to customers, which is really important. We do actually recommend sort of an infrared type probe thermometer because that gives a really quick way of checking foods in the fridge. And another little hack that I just wanted to share with you today is to perhaps use a dummy food as a way of taking fridge temperature. So some businesses will use a jelly block or a bottle of water. So rather than sticking a probe into customers' food, you're actually sticking a probe into just a dummy food that won't be used for service to the customer. And what that does is it just gives you a temperature of what, it tells you what temperature the food is in the fridge, because you do need to be a bit careful when relying on digital dials and some of the cheaper sort of temperature monitoring devices you get, because sometimes businesses do come a cropper when that digital dial on the fridge isn't giving you a temperature reflective of what the food is doing. So a little hack there, perhaps consider a dummy food for getting an actual food temperature. Cross-contamination in the fridge is a major issue. You know, we've harped on for years, but we're still finding lots of issues with cross-contamination in the fridge. So foods in the fridge should be covered or in containers to prevent it from cross-contamination. Of course, all raw food needs to be on the lowermost shelves, with any ready-to-eat foods at the higher levels of the fridge. The concept of ready-to-eat food is really important. A ready-to-eat food is a food that is going to be eaten without being cooked or reheated first. And therefore, if it does get contaminated, that contamination is going to make its way into somebody's tummy and make them ill. So ready-to-eat foods, a great example would be some salad, some prepared salad that's ready to go in a sandwich. Those foods need to be protected at all costs. And the other issue is, of course, stock rotation. That's basically making sure food doesn't hang around in the fridge longer than it should. We need to be really mindful of use by date, because we're not able to serve food past its use by date. That would be an offence. Mouldy food, although there's questions as to how safe this is or not, it's still not acceptable. Okay, and you should have a system in place to ensure that good stock rotation is in place, and we can do things like labelling, cooking small amounts on a more regular basis, and of course operating on a first in, first out basis. So preparation, one of the really important parts of food production, and making sure it's safe. And we need to be making sure that when we're preparing, handling food, it's protected against all sources of contamination. So have a think about what sources of chemical contamination exist. Physical, so things like foreign bodies. Biological, that's obviously bugs and bacteria. And of course, allergens now is a really important one. The gold standard is to have dedicated areas for preparation of raw and ready-to-eat foods. That's not possible in all settings, in small kitchens, etc. And in those settings, then cleaning followed by disinfection between raw and ready-to-eat foods is absolutely critical. And again, what we should be doing is aim to have dedicated equipment for the preparation of raw and ready-to-eat foods. So lots of people have got colour-coded chopping boards, colour-coded knives, but think about other equipment that also comes into contact with food, you know, such as sort of buckets, containers, utensils, things like that. And again, if we can't have separate dedicated equipment, it's really important that we're cleaning and disinfecting in between tasks. One big no-no is we cannot be using complex equipment. So that's equipment which you cannot easily clean, sort of mincers, dicers, slicers, robocoops, things like that. Vacuum packers, they're difficult to clean. We can't clean them separate. So actually you do have to have entirely separate complex equipment for raw and ready to eat foods. Not having that in place will really hit that food hygiene rating score hard. So please be aware of those last couple of points. And we absolutely need to minimize the time that food is out of temperature control. One of the biggest problems we're seeing on inspections is just the sheer amount of food that's out on the surface. It's not being prepared, it's just sat there. And again, that's going to really hit that score hard. And of course, preparing small amounts of food regularly. So cooking, we need to make sure that foods are not being sent out undercooked. You'll be really surprised to see how many complaints we have, especially things like chicken, from members of the public who have been and got a takeaway, and then they're able to provide us with the food that's still bloody and raw in the middle, and that's a serious issue. Of course, thorough cooking relies on making sure that foods are thoroughly defrosted before cooking begins, of course. And again, what we do really promote is cooking in smaller quantities on a more regular basis. Try and avoid huge great joints, huge great pans and liquid sauces and other foods, because obviously that's difficult to cook, can lead to problems with cool spots and toxin formation, etc. So try and cook small amounts more regularly. And where you can, certainly operate on a cook-serve basis. It's important that food handlers understand different ways of checking that food's cooked. Of course, lots of people are using probes and things like that, which is good, but there are other ways of checking that food is cooked by sort of slicing in and checking juices run clear. Sometimes those things are quicker and easier. If we are going to use a temperature probe, we need to make sure it's used correctly. Of course, if you put in putting a probe into food, you need to make sure it's clean. Lots of people are cleaning the probes after it's being used, but we really need to make sure it's clean before it goes in. And of course, if we're sticking anything in food, it needs to be cleaned and disinfected. So disinfectant wipes for probes, or blue roll with a disinfectant on it. It's really important that we're keeping that probe clean. We also need to understand the different time temperature combinations when using a temperature probe. Cooking relies on a certain temperature for a certain time. So if we're using a probe to check that the food is cooked, we need to have an understanding of these time temperature combinations. Generally, we recommend that when using a probe, you aim for 82 degrees for around 6 seconds. That will show that that food is cooked. For some types of food, for example, fish, chefs aren't going to be happy to cook fish to 82 degrees. It would be destroyed. So there are lower time temperature combinations, for example, 70 for 2 minutes, which, although it hasn't cooked it so extensively at a high temperature, you've cooked it at a lower temperature, but for a longer period of time, which will be effective at killing the germs and bugs. And like I said earlier, it is good practice to record some cooked food temperatures, although the law doesn't necessarily require this. It's good practice, and it would certainly help you defend yourselves against an allegation of food poisoning. Now, cooling is one of those things that businesses really aren't getting right, and actually rapid cooling is critical to food safety. Okay, so it's important that staff understand the importance of rapid cooling. And they also need to make sure they're aware of different methods that can be applied for speeding up the cooling process. I'm going to run through some use of blast chillers. Not many businesses have that luxury, so therefore there are other methods. For example, using ice baths, transferring sort of foods that have been cooked in large saucepans into large shallow containers to allow rapid heat loss and for that food to cool. Similar, portioning large quantities of hot foods into smaller portions, again, will increase the surface area and get that food cooled a bit quickly. Use of fans, choosing the coolest part of the kitchen, for example, is really sensible. And one thing we really struggle with is when businesses are covering hot food or wrapping it tightly, because all of that does, it keeps that food hotter for longer, and that can lead to real serious food safety hazards. And ultimately, we need to get foods transferred into a fridge as quickly as possible. So service. The point we're handling the food over to our customers. Any chilled food on display, again, must be kept below 8 degrees. There is a temperature exemption which you may be able to make use of. If you're holding food above 8 degrees whilst it's on display or service, you can do so out of temperature control for up to 4 hours. That can be really useful for the things like buffets, events, etc. But you can only do that for a single period of 4 hours, and it's one single period, so it's not a period of 2 hours and then next day a period of 2 hours. It's one single period of up to 4 hours, after which it either needs to be returned to temperature control or disposed of. If you're going to use that temperature control exemption, you do need to have a sort of a system in place that you can demonstrate that 4 hour rule is being effectively complied with. Similarly, any hot foods on display for service must be kept at or above 63 degrees. And when it comes to hot food, just like with cold food, there is a temperature control exemption, but that's for a single period of up to 2 hours. Okay, again, great for businesses where you might be offering a buffet type arrangement. Stock rotation obviously has to be in place, and the worst thing to see is when people are sort of topping up buffets or displays of food, because obviously there's some food sat there at the bottom of that pan which is deteriorating. And we really need to think how we're going to prevent sort of customer contamination at that point, at the point of service or display. Keeping food covered, using sneeze screens, and making sure utensils that customers are handling can't actually fall into the food itself. We've probably all seen this at buffets. It's particularly gross when you get to the beans on the breakfast buffet and the utensils are sat in the beans, and people have been handling that utensil and then they're just transferring any bacteria from their hands into your food, which is quite gross. And of course, we also need to think how we're going to prevent allergen cross-contamination on things like buffets, etc., or self-service counters. Personal hygiene is absolutely critical to food safety, and food handlers do have some legal obligations here themselves. They must maintain a high degree of personal hygiene. They must wear clean PPE. And this is a really important point to make sure that you and your staff understand, is that they must report any illness or symptoms suggesting an infectious disease, sickness, diarrhea, infected wounds, etc. And nobody that's suffering from anything that could be passed on in food should be allowed to work with food. And we need to exclude people that report those symptoms. And the 48-hour rule here is really important, and it's important that you and your staff understand the 48-hour rule. Sometimes there's a misconception that the 48-hour rule starts from when you first get ill, but it's not. The 48-hour rule applies from the moment of the last symptom. So it gives the body 48 hours symptom-free to get over that illness and allow the body to finish excreting those potentially infectious bugs and bacteria. I'm not going to touch a huge amount on allergies and intolerances because, like Luke said at the start of the presentation, we've got a webinar next week which is going to go into lots of detail on this. Allergies and intolerances, as it says at the bottom, can kill, so it's really important that we've got this under control. Now, just a quick overview of what you've got to do. You must be able to provide allergy information on the food that you sell, prepare, serve. You have to be able to tell customers on request which allergens are in those foods. If a customer requests that a dish is made without allergens, you can say no. So you don't have to serve an allergen sufferer food. However, if you do agree to produce a meal that the allergen sufferer says they can have based on knowledge of what's in that food, you must make sure that that meal is free of those allergens. So what this means is you have to make sure that knives, ladles, bowls, chopping boards, work surfaces, clothing, hands are thoroughly cleaned before you prepare that meal for somebody that suffers from an allergen. And I think this bottom point is really important. If you're not completely confident that you can produce an allergen-free meal, you must say no, you must refuse. There's a lot of misunderstanding around what business can, can't do, should, shouldn't do, but that summarises, I think, the main points around allergens, and my colleagues will talk to you lots more about that next week. There's a quick plug for that webinar. That's on Wednesday the 30th of October. Get in touch if you want to book yourself on that. I'd really recommend it. So the last sort of criteria then that we use to determine that food hygiene rating is how well the business is complying with the structural and equipment requirements of the legislation. So, of course, we're looking at cleaning and disinfection. That's a key consideration, as you might expect. Now, the law is really clear. It requires a high standard of cleanliness. Okay, so we are looking for high standards of cleanliness on inspections. Structural surfaces, i.e. floors, walls, ceilings, they must be kept clean. So hoovered, swept, brushed, clean with hot water. The point I really need to stress here, because a lot of businesses are getting this wrong, is any surfaces and equipment which come into contact with food, so direct contact with food, must be cleaned, i.e. with hot soapy water, and disinfected. It's not suitable to just wash food contact equipment in a sink of hot soapy water. Anything that comes into contact with food must be cleaned and disinfected, and we call that the two-stage clean. Disinfection can be achieved in a couple of ways. You can use a chemical disinfectant, but if you're lucky enough to have a dishwasher with a hot rinse cycle, providing that rinse cycle hits 82 degrees and above, you can use the dishwasher's rinse cycle to achieve disinfection. Okay. Hand contact surfaces, so that's dials, switches, handles, anything which comes into contact with hands in the food room must also, by law, be cleaned and disinfected. Okay. This next point is also really important. Any disinfectants in use within the kitchen must comply with one of those British standards. Okay, we're finding lots of products in kitchens which don't comply. If they don't comply, there's then questions how effective any disinfection in that business is. So that's actually really major. So either make a note of that now or make sure you make a note of that after the presentation. You've got to make sure that you're using any disinfectants in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Hopefully you've all heard of something called contact time. That's the time that the disinfectant needs to be in contact with the surface to achieve disinfection, to make sure those bugs and bacteria are destroyed. Different products have different contact times, so if you're swapping between products, you need to make sure that the correct contact time is being followed, or you won't be achieving disinfection. Now, we recommend a disinfectant with a contact time as short as possible. Okay, so 30 seconds is the shortest available. That gives you that kind of spray and wipe kind of performance. Some are up to 15 minutes. Well, there's not many food handlers that have got time to wait 15 minutes before they wipe the spray off the surface. And we've already touched on dishwashers. As long as they've got a rinse cycle of 82 and above, you can use that to achieve the disinfection part that we discussed earlier. And we need to also be thinking clean the hand surfaces and equipment between different allergens, of course. Structural issues do cause a lot of businesses to get a lower score. I know this is difficult when sort of money is short and tight, but certainly try and maintain the main kitchen in a sound condition to avoid being penalised on the score. So structural surfaces, so floors, walls, ceilings, they must be maintained in a sound condition, capable of being kept clean. So we're not looking for flaking paint and so on and so forth. All equipment which comes into contact with food must be in good condition and capable of being kept cleaned and disinfected. So we are seeing sort of equipment deteriorate and remain in use, and sometimes that can involve some quite nasty food complaints. So for example, utensils that are made of metal, we're actually finding food complaints, and I'd say a growing number of food complaints where sort of equipment has become damaged and it's ended up in food. You have to have by law a dedicated wash hand basin, so that's separate from your food and equipment wash sink. There has to be a dedicated wash hand basin, and that should be provided with liquid soap and paper towels. Toilets must not open into areas where food is stored and prepared. We're seeing again, sort of, especially with new businesses coming online, toilets and bathrooms where buildings have been converted, they are opening direct into food preparation areas, and that's not compliant with the law. And there must be adequate lighting and ventilations in kitchens and storerooms. Pest control is obviously critical. This really will impact on your food hygiene rating score if there are any issues around pest proofing or indeed a pest infestation. Of course, food rooms and areas where food and food packaging is stored must be pest proof. And when we say pest proof, if we can get a pen or a pencil through a gap, you can certainly get rodents accessing the premises. So you need to be really careful that your premises are proofed correctly. It is good practice to appoint a competent pest control contractor, and there is a British Pest Control Association, and we do recommend that you use somebody that's part of that association. We do go to premises and find infestations where there is a pest control contractor in place, so the competency there can vary, and that's really sad when a business has to be closed when they've gone to the trouble and expense of appointing a contractor. So just be a bit careful there. And even if you do have a pest control contractor, we don't think it's suitable to simply pass all the responsibility on to them. So if you do have a pest control contractor, you really should be carrying out your own basic checks for entry points and any sign of an infestation. And of course, staff need to know what they're looking for, the different telltale signs of pest infestation. And if you do find an issue with pests, the recommendation is to close immediately, because if you don't and you get a visit or a member of staff reports to a sales or a customer, it's very rarely we'd be comfortable to allow that business to continue trading. So if you do find a problem, close immediately, get it dealt with and then reopen. And you can contact us if you need support on how to do that there, but just be mindful that we do have an obligation to public health. So if you weren't willing to voluntarily close, we may need to look at a more formal approach there, but we're certainly happy to help to make sure you get it right. So we're pretty much there. We've flashed up now, everyone, some free resources for further information. The Safer Food Better Business Pack, which is the food safety management system, that's available on that link. If you don't have access to a printer, etc., you can order a pack from us. Business companion down the bottom right, that is really useful for sort of labelling and packaging information. Of course, you've got the Food Standards Agency, and I'm going to end on our own business regulatory support hub. That again is our team of excellent staff who are there to make sure that you are fully supported with any regulatory needs and can signpost you to free and paid for services that might be relevant to your business. We do have some commercial services, so those are services that you pay for, but we think they offer great value for money, and they certainly help businesses get it right first time rather than going down on the wrong tangent. So again, in Retain 5, that's essentially a pre-inspection where a food safety officer comes along, does an informal inspection that would mirror the full inspection, and then produces you a report, which if you comply with all of those things, you will get a 5. Which is great. And you can also invite us in to give business advice on any aspect of your business. So if you're looking to get into a new sector or you're looking to start a new process, you can offer us in, and we'll come and give you all the information that you need to make sure you're doing things safely and correctly. We do offer some great face-to-face training. You'll see there in the blue, we have currently got a 99% pass rate for our face-to-face training, which I'm really proud of. And we've really had some great feedback. And you can see there that we offer various different courses at different levels for different sectors. And you can scan the QR code if you want to be taken straight to book some training. But I would definitely recommend some of our face-to-face training. Like I said, 99% pass rate. We have a great time with learners and they go away with a lot better knowledge and understanding, which is brilliant.